Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. Story of the Wendigo. The Wendigo, a wealthy man, wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever haunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to take him. The Indian's name was Defago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they haunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night a windstorm came up. They lay in their tent listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling, and the more he listened, the more it sounded as if it were calling Defago's name. Defago, it called.
Defago.
I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But Defago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in a corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. What's this all about? The hunter asked. It's nothing, Defago said. But the wind continued to call to him, and Defago became more tense and restless. Defago, it called.
Defago.
Suddenly, he jumped to his feet, and he began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. You can't leave me out here, the hunter shouted. Then the wind called again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet, my burning feet of fire." Then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down toward the lake, then out into the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were so long no human being could have taken them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but there they disappeared. At first he thought that Defago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky. But that made no sense. As he stood wondering what had happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from up above, and again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet, my burning feet." But there was nothing to be seen. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago, and he started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. The following year, he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what had happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since then. Maybe it was the Wendigo, one of them said, and he laughed. It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say. A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and he asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. Second story. The ghosts that haunted my old building. I saw the ghosts haunting my new place the very first night. By then it was too late, of course. I had been through hell trying to find a place. I had already signed the lease, and this was the perfect spot, close to the hospital where I worked, affordable yet nice and newly renovated. Anyway, I soon realized the ghosts wouldn't harm me. Indeed, they seemed to have no interest in me, nor I in them. I worked hard, long shifts, and I was usually dead on my feet by the time I got home, barely staying awake long enough to shovel some food down my throat before falling asleep on the couch, dragging myself bleary-eyed to bed a couple of hours later. A few shadows flitting here and there, a few whispers and groans were hardly going to bother me. I saw much worse at work. I guess it was weird that they all had broken necks. Every single one of them. The young boy who couldn't have been more than 14. The pregnant girl. The good-looking tall man who looked like a young Paul Newman. Even with a broken neck, his head lying sideways on his shoulders, the charm of his bright blue eyes and his dashing smile shone. I wondered how many women had fallen at his feet when he flashed that smile at them when he was still alive. There were many more. They flitted around the corners of my apartment. I caught sight of them hanging around the elevators and stairwells, muttering and sighing. They vanished behind the shower curtain just as I would enter the bathroom and disappeared into the closet as I fell into bed. My first day off since I moved there was a brilliant sunny day. One of those perfect early fall days that are so much more beautiful than anything spring or summer can ever offer. I felt the fatigue of the week seeping out of my bones as I lounged in the kitchen, holding my coffee. Even the sight of the boy scurrying out of the window, his head perched awkwardly on his shoulder, didn't dampen my spurts. It did, however, pique my curiosity. Seriously, what was with the broken necks? I moved to the window and looked out into the morning sun. In the sunlight, I could clearly see a cluster of them on the fire escape landing. The fire escape stairs weaved its way down the back of the building, narrow black metal steps with a small landing on each floor. There must have been 4 of them huddled closely on the landing beneath mine. And then I noticed they were not alone. My neighbor in the unit below me, a young woman with shining browny-yellow hair, was seated with them. The only one of the group who was alive, her neck straight and unbroken, wearing fresh modern clothes. I had already realized the ghosts were all mostly dressed in grimy tatters, except of course for Paul Newman, who was sharply dressed in black. I had seen her few times already, enough to say, "Hi," and do that half-hearted smile and nod thing. She seemed like a smart, well-put-together young woman, with a nice long career ahead of her. But I guess there was no reason for her not to see the ghosts, much like I did. And more than that, it was evident by the relaxed way she was sitting with the on the landing, her legs dangling off the side, that she had already developed a relationship with them. The sight of her chatting away with the ghosts made me uneasy, in a way that just sighting the ghosts, their whispers and their sighs around the building never did. What on earth were they talking about in such an animated fashion? Innocently, I opened my own kitchen door and stepped out onto my landing. I could hear their voices, though low, quite clearly, even through the shouts of the children playing on the grassy area outside. "We won Charlie's case," I heard my living neighbors say. "Honestly, it's a personal victory for me. I hope you appreciate that. His family are going to be comfortable now." That's nice, Katie," said the pregnant girl. "Good for you." I was wondering where he'd got to. I missed seeing him all mopey and mangled up on the grounds, with his bloody yellow vest. He found peace then. "Good job, Katie." I saw Katie smiling. Yup, it was hard, and the company put up a brutal fight. But I did it. Good for him then. And you. But what does that get us, eh? We're just still left here, aren't we? Like always, cried the young boy, his eyes staring upwards at Katie. I looked at Katie's earnest young face through the metal railings, full of pity and heartache for these wretched ghosts, and I knew she wanted to help them find peace, too. I kept listening and learning. The building was on the site of the old courthouse, and the stairwell was exactly where the city gallows stood. It was Judge Wilson, Mary said. She was the pregnant girl. Mary had been hung for murdering her master who had slept with her. Her youthful beauty shone through despite her broken neck. They had said she had tricked the jail warden into impregnating her to escape hanging, even though she was already pregnant when arrested. They said her bastard should die with her. Her master and his wife had made sure of it, not wanting any rivals for their own children around. She told the story as she must have done so many times before, the pain, anger, and bewilderment in her voice still fresh, untarnished by the passage of time. I know the Wilson family, said Katie, her voice clear through the shuffling, mumbling ghost voices. They own the development company which built this place, the company we sued for Charlie. Still city bigwigs. He was a cruel, wicked man. It's not right his family prance in a boot town while we're all stuck here, can't move on because of his wickedness. This was Johnny, who would have turned 14 the day after he was hung for being part of a notorious crime gang. The leader of the gang had struck a deal with the court and given up Johnny as part of the deal. The gang leader's descendants today were partners in the Wilson Development Company. Katie sighed. It wasn't just Judge Wilson. It was all corrupt. They clustered around her, their sideways faces pleading. Please, Katie, free us too. The Paul Newman smile flashed crookedly. You'll do it for me, Katie, right? My blood ran cold. Others might die. There are children here. Katie protested. Mary cradled her belly. And my child isn't dead? There has to be blood. I knew Katie would do what it was they were asking her to do. Even though I don't remember making any movement or noise, I must have done, because suddenly all of them, Katie included, turned up, looking straight at me. Those terrible sideways faces and eyes the wrong way around, staring at me through the railings, still haunt my nightmares. He's been listening to us, cried out Mary. Maybe he's with the Wilsons. A spy, said Johnny. I turned and without saying a word, I went inside. But I couldn't stay. The walls of the apartment were bearing down on me. The whispers and sighs, so harmless before, were piercing my brain. I threw on a jacket and went outside to clear my head. I walked quickly through the children's ball game on the grassy, reaching a secluded wooded area further out. I felt better, my heart rate slowing as I wandered among the trees, breathing deeply. And then I heard a footstep, a breaking twig. I turned around, but it was too late. The last thing I saw was Katie, bearing down on me with a bat. A flash went off in my head, and I tumbled down into darkness. I swam back to consciousness. My head was throbbing and white lights were drilling into me. A voice said, "There he is. You may not think it now, but you were one of the lucky ones. Being in the hospital saved you." I concentrated. It was my colleague speaking, looking kindly down at me. "What happened?" I croaked. She gave me some water. "They found you unconscious in the woods, with head trauma. They picked up the person who will be charged with starting the fire. The police were over here. They think it's the same person who attacked you." I blinked. "What fire?" "Oh, honey, of course you wouldn't know. Sorry, I've been rushed off my feet. Burn victims in the corridors. I have to run. But your building, yes. It's gone. One of your neighbors went apes hit and burned it down last night." She left. I watched Katie's trial. She calmly described how easy it had been to set the building on fire. The Wilson contractors had cheated on the insulating materials, and within 10 minutes, the whole edifice was aflame. She showed no remorse. 25 people died, several by throwing themselves and their children out off the windows on the higher floors. Not as many as had hung wrongfully, but enough to free their ghosts. For when I was able, I walked around the burnt ruins of the building. It was peaceful, with no signs of the ghosts. Third story. The government hunts down mythical creatures and uses them against enemies of the state. I am a retired Army Special Forces operator who has 20 years of experience under my belt. 10 of those years were spent with the Scout Rangers, conducting jungle reconnaissance, covert operations, raids, hostage rescue, and all the other special operations tasks you would expect from elite military formations like SR. Meanwhile, the other 10 years was dedicated to hunting down mythical and paranormal creatures and employing said creatures against internal and external threats to the nation. I can bore you with stories of my first 10 years in the Rangers, but I doubt that it would be anything new from the stories you've already heard Special Forces operators do. Go behind enemy lines, stay undercover for weeks on end, raid enemy camps. Those are all the usual stories that have been told by others before me. So instead of telling my experiences there, I'll instead go straight to the one I'm sure has piqued your interest, my 10 years working with mythical and paranormal creatures. The idea of using mythical and paranormal creatures may seem strange at first. However, it has been a practice that has been in armed forces doctrine for nearly 7 decades now, and I doubt it that they have plans of removing it anytime soon. It is an effective method of clearing an area of enemies, and although mistakes can result in catastrophic problems, such occurrences are few. Now, I'm not saying mistakes rarely happen, because a good number of them happened in the past. However, their numbers are small enough that not many people take note of them. Besides, since operations often happen in isolated areas in hostile insurgent territory, any unexpected casualties from nearby innocent civilians can easily be blamed on the local insurgency. Now, I can go on into more detail about the cover-up campaigns and screening operations made by the government to hide their use of mythical and paranormal creatures, but that task is assigned to another special operation group of the armed forces. I'm not exactly sure of what their operations are and how their operations group is run, but I do know that they are effective in their job. Anyways, getting back on track, my Special Operations Group is known as the Mythical and Paranormal Warfare Operations Group, MPWOG, although we just refer to it as MPOG since it's less of a mouthful. You're probably thinking I'm crazy right now for saying this, and I can't blame you. If I heard of such a thing all those years ago, I would have laughed too if I had heard of such a group. It sounds outrageous and silly. True, the armed forces use psychological warfare to trick insurgents that creatures like Aswangs were out to get them, but those were nothing more than just props and sounds, not actual mythical creatures. However, if it weren't for the fact that I encountered MPOG during one of those few accidents I was talking about, then I would have never thought that the government really used creatures of pure evil to fight its enemies. It happened sometime around 1988. Back then, my Scout Ranger Company was deployed at southern Luzon to assist Regional Unified Command 4 in operations against the communist insurgents in the area. Patrolling the various jungle-covered mountains in the region, we would spend weeks out in the field, trying to locate any trails that led to the insurgents' camps. Because of the dense jungle in the area, it wasn't too hard for the enemy to conceal their camps from aerial observation. Unable to locate insurgent bases from the air, it was up to us Rangers to hunt them down. However, on one of our nightly hunts, we encountered something that would change the rest of my career. Trekking through the mountainous jungle, trying to keep as silent as possible, my squad went through an unmarked path, hoping to find any evidence of insurgent activity. The plan was to find as many tracks as possible until they led us to their main camp. This was easier said than done, but we like to pride ourselves at being good at these kinds of jobs. All around us were a dense concentration of trees and slippery, muddy ground, while just a few meters away, on both our flanks, were various mountain caves that ominously stared at us. From my position near the head of our column, I did my best to constantly glance towards the caves, being mindful to note any sign of movement. Such places were perfect hiding spots, and there was no way of telling if an insurgent was hiding inside, ready to come out and fire a long burst of automatic rifle fire. Despite being special forces, night vision goggles were pretty rare back then, especially for us field units. Because of this, we had to rely on our eyes, the moonlight, and our refined instincts in order to feel what was in our surroundings. A few hours into our patrol, my pointman, a PFC Gomez, reported seeing smoke a few meters ahead of us. Immediately ordering a halt, I told my squad to take a defensive position and keep their eyes open for a potential ambush. After that, I quietly made my way forward until I reached Gomez, who was crouching down by some underbush. "What's up ahead?" I asked in a whisper, as I crouched down next to him. He pointed towards a tree up ahead of us. "You see that big tree over there? Well, when the wind blew and caused the leaves of the trees ahead of us to begin to sway, I managed to get a quick and clear view of its top, and I noticed there was smoke coming from it." "From on top of the tree?" I asked, squinting my eyes to stare at where he was pointing at. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Just wait for the wind." So I did. Soon enough, a strong breeze came along, making the many branches of the trees around us sway, opening up the curtain of leaves that had earlier blocked my line of sight. Through that small opening, I just managed to see the top of the big tree Gomez was pointing at, and right on top of it was a trail of smoke. Reflecting from the moonlight, a trail of thin white smoke emitted from inside a wall of large leaves atop the tree, as if it were a chimney. I found this odd, and I remember thinking how strange it was for someone to make camp on top of a tree, but I quickly shrugged off my doubts, as I realized that it could be an insurgent lookout who was using the tree as a safe outpost to guard their perimeter. I had never encountered such a situation before, but it made sense to me at the time. A large tree provided a safe, concealed place from where a sentry could stay for the night and observe the ground below him. With that in mind, I convinced myself that it was indeed probably an insurgent there who had stupidly lit a fire on top his tree or had carelessly decided to smoke a cigarette. Whichever of the two, it gave away his position. The presence of an outpost like that could have been a sign that we were close to their camp. Emboldened by this, I decided to push my squad forward to further investigate the area and gather more intelligence. Following behind Gomez, I kept my eyes on the tree, looking for any sign of movement. The rest of the squad followed behind us, all alert and ready to engage in case something bad happened. Then, all of a sudden, I heard the sound of rustling leaves and bending branches. Quickly reacting to this, I aimed my rifle forward and pointed it towards the big tree ahead of us. By then, we were only 10 meters away from the tree, and I was afraid that the insurgent noticed our approach and hurriedly got down to make an escape. However, when I scanned the area near the tree, I saw no person nearby. Thinking that he managed to escape and run for home, I let out a curse in frustration. In my mind, I assumed that he would soon be informing his superior of our presence, and we would then have a patrol sent against us. Not wanting to risk an action with such a small force, I began planning our escape. However, before I could give out any orders, a deep and old voice spoke loudly from our right. "You are not supposed to be here." it said firmly, making me almost jump from my position. Out of instinct, I immediately pointed my weapon at the source of the sound. The rest of my squad did the same. At first, I couldn't actually see the source of the voice. However, as I searched the shadows, my eyes soon fell on something that made my spine shiver in fear. Through the dim light of the moon, I managed to see a bulky naked man, with skin so dark that he almost seemed like a shadow. Scanning his body, I couldn't help but notice how large and grotesque his arms, legs, and torso were. The muscles on them were large and seemingly deformed, giving him a shape that seemed odd and unsettling. Soon fixing my gaze upon his face, I then saw two wide white eyes staring back at me with an unnatural aura that made my heart nearly stop in fright. I don't scare easily, so I was surprised at how scared I was feeling during that moment. Studying the person before me, I was unsure why he looked so strange and so frightening. I felt uneasy just to stand before him, and I had to fight the urge to step back and bolt away from him. I was confused by this and didn't know why I was so scared. Trying my best to keep my composure, I tried to push away further thought of fear as I spoke up towards the person who stumbled upon us. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my sights trained on him as I kept a stern grip on my weapon. "What are you doing here?" It responded to my question by laughing. In a very rough tone, I let out a deep laugh, as if it was mocking me for asking him such questions. Normally, I would have been angry at such a taunt, but instead I felt scared. Watching him carefully, I then saw his hand move to grab something, forcing me to act on my instincts. "Don't move. Keep your hands on your sides," I shouted, but he simply ignored me. In my mind, I thought he was grabbing for a gun, or worse, a grenade. Reacting as fast as I can, I quickly pressed the trigger of my rifle. However, to my surprise, I found myself unable to do so. Trying to will my finger to pull the trigger, I realized that I could not do it. The simple act, one that I have done countless times, could not be done. As if some kind of invisible force was preventing me, I found my finger frozen and stopped. Then I noticed that my squad was not reacting to the strange man's movements. I knew them, each one of the rangers in my squad, and I knew that they too would have instantly pulled the triggers of the rifles and shot the man. Yet not a single shot was fired. Finding my body frozen and my heart pumping fast in fear, I was surprised to find that I was still able to turn my head. Looking left and right, I saw each member of my squad seemingly frozen, as we were all stuck in a pose of pointing our guns at the man, but unable to do anything else but turn our heads. Studying the expressions on the rangers closest to me, I can see the fear plastered on their faces, the same fear that I knew was on mine. Trying to mask the fear with anger, I can hear a chorus of curses coming out of their mouths as they tried to comprehend what was happening. I too would have let out a curse, but the remaining calm part of my mind told me that it wouldn't have done anything to change the situation. So instead of shouting, I remained silent and returned my focus to the strange man. Checking what the man had grabbed, I was surprised and confused to see that he had picked up a thick lit cigarette whose smoke and stench freely floated in the air. Placing the cigarette in his mouth, he then looked at each one of us and gave an unsettling large smile, which revealed teeth that were as white as his eyes. "I'm not supposed to let anyone pass through this trail," it told us in its deep voice. Then, it began to move closer towards us. "None of you should be here." Still unable to move, we were left helpless. One of my rangers, a PFC Dominguez, found himself being approached directly by the strange man. Watching the man as he approached Dominguez, I can see him smile at the ranger and blow a thick cloud of smoke towards his face, making the ranger cough. After coughing out the smoke he inhaled, Dominguez turned his head to give the man a long look before turning his head towards me. "Sergeant, I think," he began, his voice shaky as both me and the strange man stared at him. "I think he's a copper." A copper? A creature known to lurk in the jungles and mess around with those who travel through them. We had all heard the stories as kids, and as I stared at the man before us, then I still found it hard to believe that the man before was a copper. That small part of my brain tried to rationalize what was actually happening, as I thought that coppers were nothing but mythical creatures. They couldn't possibly exist. I fought the urge to believe what Dominguez had said, and instead thought that what really was before us was an insurgent. Somehow, this insurgent had administered some sort of airborne chemical agent that had paralyzed our bodies and prevented us from moving. That was what I tried to convince myself. I would have held on to that belief if it were not for the events that happened next. Staring sharply at Dominguez with his large eyes, I saw the man's expression change from amused to hurt, then to angered. Feeling my blood chill, I felt my fear rise up as he moved his face closer towards Dominguez until his eyes were staring directly at him. "Don't you ever dare call me a copper," its deep voice shouted, the noise seemingly echoing all around us. "You will pay for what you said." Then he moved his head to stare at each one of us, scanning our faces and glancing at our eyes. "You will all pay for being here tonight. None of you are supposed to be here." Trying to comprehend what he meant, I suddenly felt my thoughts interrupted when my hands suddenly began to move against my will. Unable to stop them, I let out a curse as I felt my hands loosen its grip on my rifle, before having one hand move towards the holster of my sidearm. My eyes went wide when I felt my hand grip my pistol and pull it out of the holster. Being willed by something else, my hands then switched off the safety of the pistol before raising the weapon up. Realizing what was happening, I tried my best to fight my own uncontrollable hand. "Don't resist it," the copper said, his voice low and seemingly everywhere. "Do it. Don't fight back. Let your desire end the pain." Using all the willpower I had, I fought and fought, trying to tell my own hand not to obey the copper's will. To my surprise, my efforts seemed to be doing something, as the smooth movement of my hands suddenly slowed as if encountering resistance. Feeling encouraged, I closed my eyes and tried to blot out the voice of the copper, but suddenly got knocked off my concentration when I heard 3 loud gunshots. My senses returned to my surroundings. My ears then caught 3 firm thuds around me, and I soon realized what that was. Corporal Villanueva, PFC Gomez, and PFC Ronaldo all carried sidearms. If they were being willed to do the same thing my own hands were trying to do to me, then it means they had lost the fight. Unable to spare a second to grieve for them, I tried to return my focus to my own battle. However, I was once more distracted by the shouts and curses from the remaining members of my squad. PFC Dominguez, PFC Hernandez, and PFC Isidro did not have sidearms, but they did carry combat knives for covert operations. The horrible image of them trying to stab themselves filled my mind, as I realized that this was a much worse fate compared to being shot by your own hand against your will. Listening to their battle, I felt my heart drop as they cried out in anger and frustration. Letting out screams, they fought hard to save their lives. But it sounded like a losing battle. "Join your friends," the copper said, his words ringing in my ears. "It is time to rest now, so let it be and don't fight back. Death will be swift and peaceful." A succession of sharp stabs could then be heard, followed by gurgling sounds after each one. I knew where their knives went, and I felt heartbroken as each one of them fell to the ground, leaving me as the only one left in my squad. With my heart broken and my mind sufficiently distracted, my uncontrollable hand was able to gain some advantage, as it managed to move the barrel of my pistol closer to the temple of my head. Emotionally drained by the loss of my rangers, a small part of me felt that I should give in and let this unknown force make my hand kill myself. But I was a stubborn person and I kept fighting. I knew that it was losing the fight and that it was only a matter of time before the pistol got a good angle against me, but I would not just give in so easily. I want to fight till the last second, just like my rangers did. Trying my best to return my will to my hand, I concentrated as much as I could, trying to avoid any distractions. This, however, proved harder than expected, as the copper moved itself in front of me and stared. Chuckling deeply as it watched me, it stared right into my eyes. By doing this, I found it harder to fight my hand, as the copper gave some sort of invisible power to ensure that I would lose. "Your friends are waiting for you," he said. "What's the point of living without them? Join them, join them, join them." Cursing it over and over, I allowed my rage to give me strength to resist for just a bit longer. But each second brought the barrel of my pistol closer and closer to the temple of my head. I was now losing strength, and sheer anger and force of will would not prevent my oncoming death. However, just before the barrel could move the last inch towards my temple, I suddenly felt the unseen control on my hand loosen, then disappear. Taken by surprise by this, I looked forward towards the copper to see him stare at something behind me before slowly backing away. As he retreated, I felt the wonderful sensation of being able to control my body once more. Feeling suddenly weak as my will was returned, I almost collapsed onto the ground. However, I managed to maintain enough strength to keep myself up, as I watched the copper move backwards before turning around to make a sprint in what looked like an attempt to escape. But before it could get away, it suddenly stopped, as if someone blocked its path. Before I could find out what had stopped it, I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Instinctively, I turned around and suddenly saw 3 figures approaching me. At first, I mistook the dark silhouettes approaching me as more copperous. However, I soon realized that these figures were smaller. Careful study of them reassured me that they were not creatures of the unknown, but instead fellow humans. But, as I studied them, I couldn't help but wonder who they were. The 3 men had black battle dress uniforms, making them easily blend with the night. Staring at them as they approached, I noticed all 3 of them had their weapons drawn and ready. However, I also noted that each one of them had a hand raised. Focusing on their raised hands, I noticed that they were all holding a large bottle with a silver-colored material inside of it. For a moment, I wondered what was inside that bottle, before letting my thoughts drift and wonder who these men were. Inspecting the gear on them, I was impressed to see that they were fully kit for combat and night operations, and aside from the fact that they lacked a helmet, they seemed to remind me of combat-ready American soldiers. With night vision goggles on their faces, ballistic vests protecting their torso, and a vest filled with rifle magazines and grenades, they looked nothing like the common field soldiers in the armed forces. Due to their look, I initially mistook them as American Special Forces who somehow stumbled upon my predicament. However, a quick greeting in Tagalog quickly threw away my assumption, as I soon realized that these men were Filipinos. "Hey, are you all right?" one of them asked as he approached me. "Yes," I managed to reply, my voice shaky. Lifting my hand, I saw that it was shaking also. The battle had taken its toll both on my mind and body. "Good," he told me, with a hint of relief in his voice. "You're one lucky person, you know that?" Moving closer to check on me, he soon pulled me aside so I could find a place to sit and rest. As he did this, I was able to look at the ground around me to see 6 bodies lying on the ground. I felt a pang in my heart as I saw them. My whole squad was dead now, and emotions swirled inside me at the thought of it. As I sat down and tried to reflect on what happened, I suddenly remembered the creature that caused all of this trouble and turned my attention towards the direction I last saw him. Still standing in the same spot, I saw the copper remained unmoving in his position as another group of black-cladded soldiers emerged from the darkness, weapons drawn and ready. Although I had a hard time seeing clearly in the night, I did note that this group also had raised hands, and I knew that this meant that they too were carrying the same bottles filled with silver-colored material. As these men got closer to the copper, the creature seemed to hiss in anger at each step they took. However, unlike his earlier arrogance and dominance, the copper looked helpless against the new arrivals. Once more my curiosity was ignited, as I wondered who these men were and what was so special about these bottles these men carried. As I sat there and watched, I took in what I could and hoped that I would at least get some answer from them later on. After a while, most of the black-cladded men formed a circle around the copper, while one detached himself from the main group and walked towards me. As he got closer, he took a quick glance towards my fallen rangers before doing a sign of the cross. "I'm sorry about your friends," he told me. "I'll detail one of my squads to recover them once we secure our target." "You mean that copper?" I inquired. "Yes, but that's not a copper. Never mistake it as a copper. They hate it when you do that," he said, gesturing towards the terrible monster behind him. "What that is Agda. Similar to a copper, yes, but only native to eastern Visayas. Unlike copras, they are more hostile and can get very dangerous. But they're easy to control once you get mercury near them." "Is that what you were carrying in those bottles?" I asked. "Yes," he said, before continuing his explanation. "Mercury has this magical effect on them that weakens their power. An Agda can seduce you to do things you don't like. But if you have mercury on you, then it is unable to use its powers or strength." "Well, that's good to know," I said, making a note to always bring mercury with me in any future patrol. However, as he explained the creature to me, there was one thing that nagged my mind. Taking my chances, I decided to ask him in hopes of getting an answer. "You said that Agdas were native to eastern Visayas, right? So what is it doing here in Luzon?" "Because we brought him here," he told me plainly. "You brought him here?" I said, nearly shouting it. Eyes wide in shock, I felt more confused than ever. Why would you bring a terrible creature like that here? I felt rage boil inside me at the thought of what they had done. "You're soldiers too, aren't you? You're supposed to protect the country, not spread harm within its borders," I said, although at the time I wasn't really sure if they were soldiers like me. For all I knew, they could actually be members of a private army for some kind of organization that collects these creatures. "Easy now, it's not like we had a choice," he explained. "The orders came from the AFP chief, who ordered MPOG to deploy CN 0109, since he thought the Agda would be an effective way of countering insurgent movements in the area. Well, he did do a good job for the first few nights, but apparently his habit of mischief made him forget that our deal meant that he could only target members of the insurgency. He was out of line for targeting your men, and I apologize that our operations group did not realize the danger sooner. This was our first time deploying an Agda and maybe the last." I stared at him for a moment and took in what he said. However, out of all the things he said, there was one thing that stuck out the most that I couldn't help but continue to think about. "What's MPOG?" With that, he began telling me about the operations group and how they used mythical and paranormal creatures for various clandestine operations. He was a lieutenant, I learned, and his platoon was one of a few elite units trained at deploying and capturing creatures and entities through the use of special methods and equipment. At first, I didn't want to believe him. But then again, how could I not believe him when one of the very creatures they used had attacked me and killed my squad? At the end of his explanation, I found myself with a new view of the world. As if my eyes were now open, I now realized that there were more things that lurk in the darkness of the jungle than just insurgents. This scared me a lot, and I realized that I suddenly felt thankful for the fact that an organization like MPOG existed to make sure that such creatures and entities did not wreak havoc upon the cities, towns, and barrios of the country. Why tell me all this? I finally asked. If your operations group is supposed to be secret, why reveal so much information to an outsider like me? I looked at him, and through the faint light of the moon, I saw a grin form on his face. Because I see potential in you. I have never seen someone with a strong enough will to resist the deadly seductions of an Agda, and because of that I know MPOG would have a place for you. Recruitment season is coming up soon, and the operations group only sends invitations to those who we think will qualify. Once the offer arrives, I hope you take it. With that, he gave me a small nod before walking away. A few minutes later, the rest of the MPOG forces arrived to help secure the area and contain the Agda. Later that morning, I was returned to the army camp, which me and my squad had left the night before. The official story was that my squad was ambushed by insurgents, and that I was able to hold out until reinforcements arrived to recover me and the bodies of my rangers. For this, I was awarded the Gold Cross. However, knowing the true events, I felt unworthy to receive the award. This was my first encounter with mythical creatures and MPOG, but it was definitely not the last. 2 months after the encounter, I received a letter inviting me for M.P.W.O.G qualifications. I accepted it, and thus my career in the operations group began. You're probably wondering what this letter has to do with you. Well, the lieutenant I met during the night of the Agda encounter was your father. He would eventually become my commanding officer and, in later years, a good friend. I know you are curious about who he really was and what happened to him, so I will tell you about his deeds and his ultimate faith. But I need to make sure first that you believe me. I don't want to waste time and energy writing a letter that you might just crumple up and throw away. So if you get this and believe what I am saying, then I suggest that you write back to me, and I'll tell you all about your father's time at MPOG. This letter was recently sent to me, and I need help figuring out what to do next. For a few months now, I have been collecting various notes and journals of my father in order to create a biography in his honor. My father was a scout ranger who achieved the rank of major before passing away in an operation that was deemed so secret that until today me and my family still don't know what exactly happened. As part of the biography, I had asked various colleges of my father to write letters about their experience with him. I have received dozens of letters from his old army friends, but this one stuck out the most. At first, I didn't know if I should believe him. Everything he said didn't make sense. My father was a scout ranger, not some special forces operator that worked with mythical creatures that don't exist. However, the letter came with a photo. In that photo were 2 uniformed men posing next to some kind of makeshift sandbag bunker. Both men had patches with MPWOG written on it. One of the men was my father. Do you guys think I should write him back? 4th story. The Wendigo is hungry too. In July 2008, I believe it was the 30th, me and my buddy drove to Manitoba in order to pick some medicines for an upcoming sweat. So we get to west of Portage la Prairie, and my buddy pulls into a gas station because he has to use the bathroom. I begin to doze off when all of a sudden I feel 2 cold and bony hands wrap around my throat. The smell of decay fills my nostrils, and it makes my eyes water. I have been hunting quite a lot, and I have of course stumbled upon animal carcasses rotting, but that is a smell I would readily prefer over the smell that this creature emitted. I can't move my head as I try to see what is on top on me. I can feel tears starting to run down my face as black dots started to dance in front of my eyes.
Bang bang bang.
I look over at the window of the truck and see my buddy smashing his hands against the window. He looks petrified and keeps screaming a word over and over, but I can't hear what it was over the ringing in my ears. I read his lips and my blood runs cold. He is screaming the word, Wendigo. I think back to when I was a little kid and I had stayed out past sundown on a bitter winter evening. My father is waiting outside. He has a scared yet stern look on his face and he says, "You better get inside the house, boy. There are man-eaters in these woods." For years, I pester him over and over about what he was talking about, and that's when he finally tells me about the Wendigo, the ravenous spirits that look to possess weak-willed or starving people. They are cannibals born from the harsh circumstances of the great winters that have occurred. I remember my father said all you need to do is blow a puff of air at it, and if you are of pure and strong intentions, then it vanishes in search of its next meal. However, if you are a greedy and weak-willed person, it will possess you and make you into one of them. You will constantly crave meat, but only the flesh of man will satiate your hunger. But that relief is only a few moments. Then you will be on the hunt for your next meal, walking around the woods with a constant void in your stomach and a craving stuck in your mind. I turn slightly towards the beast and puff a breath in its direction. All of a sudden, the horrid smell of decay vanishes and the hands disappear. I feel an overwhelming urge to vomit creep up my throat, but I restrain myself. My buddy hops into the truck. We are both silent as we drive on. Our breaths are the only sounds to break up the silence. We drive for around 10 minutes before my buddy shouts, "What the fuck?" He slams on the brakes and screeches to a halt and almost collides with the car in front of us. The car turns around and we see what is causing the sudden blockage in traffic. A Greyhound bus is pulled over to the side and a bunch of shaken-looking people are standing beside it. Their gazes can only be described as a 1,000-yard stare. RCMP cruisers surround the bus. The red and blue lights dance on our windows. My buddy turns around swearing at the inconvenience, and we drive back to a shady hotel we had passed earlier. The whole way there I am sitting motionlessly. A sense of dread is ever present in my gut as we arrive at the hotel. We check in and start putting our stuff down when my buddy turns on the news. It's a pretty shitty television, but soon enough we see breaking news flash across the screen and I stop what I'm doing. The news reporter looks shaken as she rattles off. One adult male is confirmed to be dead in what is being called a frenzied knife attack. We are getting multiple reports of the suspect consuming parts of the male's body. The police have not commented any further. I look over to my buddy and he has gone ashen white. He looks over at me and says in a withdrawn voice, "I guess the Wendigo needed to be fed." The victim was Tim McLean. He was brutally murdered on Greyhound bus number 1170 by a man named Vince Lee who was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He told investigators that God told him to kill Tim. Tim McLean was sleeping as Vince stabbed him and was awoken to a crazed Vince standing over him holding a hunting knife. Tim was stabbed over 60 times and dismembered. Vince consumed parts of his head and actually stuffed chunks of Tim into his pockets. Want to know the best part? Vince Lee was released with a new name and no criminal record. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and was excused from his actions. So all of the Americans that complain about your justice system, be thankful that they at least give out appropriate sentences for individuals like these. To this day, I wonder if Tim McLean could see the crazed Wendigo staring back at him as he looked into his killer's eyes begging for mercy. Fifth story. I found a phone in the woods, and this is what was on it. Alright, first off, this isn't my story. I found a phone out in the woods near my house. They have been bulldozing and taking down trees to build new houses, and I like to walk around and see what they've done. I do not know the woman that posted this, or what her Reddit handle was, but I know that she wanted it up here because she believed we were the only people that would believe her. Her phone was pretty banged up and has absolutely no service. I figured this was the least I could do for her. From here on, these are the words of a Mrs. Helena White. October 9th, 2013. My name is Helena White. I am 36-year-old female from Kentucky, which is where I currently am. I need someone to see this, though by the time you do I will already be dead. I don't have internet access here, just my cell phone that's dying and has 100% no service. I have scheduled this to upload to Reddit, where people actually believe the weird things we all have to say to each other, if anyone ever finds it. Everyone there has an open mind and can at least know the truth. I have also scheduled one to go to the police station, but they will never find me. The best they can do is give my family the news. I feel terrible for my mother, that she will never know what happened, never have a body to bury, never have closure. No one I know will, but at least they will know that I am gone. It's better this way, believe me. If they knew the truth, they would never sleep again, and no doubt they would hunt for me. Again, though they will never find me, I will be dead, just not gone. I know you all on Reddit have heard some seriously crazy shit. I mean, I read about the girl that found that weird creature/house thing in the woods right here in Kentucky a couple of months ago, and I've seen people talk about everything from zombies and ghouls to ghosts and vampires. If there is anywhere that will listen and know my story is true, it is here with you guys. I should explain. My husband Jeff and I headed out into the wilderness. I probably shouldn't say exactly where, because I really don't want this to happen to someone else. It's better to let it stay here with Jeff and me. But it is a very beautiful and remote patch of forest that extends for many miles. It is a very large place and does see visitors ever so often, but the seclusion of it is one thing Jeff and I both love. We had been planning this trip for months, and were seriously excited that it was finally time to go. We had everything you can imagine for camping for a full 2 weeks out here in the beautiful wilderness. Rainproof tent, dishes, cookware, food, water. We were ready for roasting marshmallows and hot dogs over the open fire, hiking and admiring the beauty all around us. Yes, I am aware that this makes me seem like a hippie, and maybe I am a little bit, but I really love the outdoors, especially the woods. Anyway, Jeff and I had planned this right down to every last detail and were ready for the perfect, tranquil, and rejuvenating camping trip. That isn't what we got, though. 2 days and we got caught in a huge thunderstorm and had to hunker down inside our tent while the wind and rain beat so loudly against the sides and top of our little rainproof tent that we thought we might be blown away. Just as quickly as it came, it was over and the sun started shining again. If you've ever lived in or visited Kentucky for any amount of time, you know what I mean when I say that this was seriously just typical Kentucky weather. It's kind of our thing, I guess. 1 minute blaring storm, next, sunshine and birds singing. After that nice little downpour, every bit of our gathered firewood was soaked and they weren't drying up anytime soon. Jeff went to find more wood and I decided to stay behind and clean out the fire pit, so it would actually burn the wood Jeff brought back. It was starting to get dark, and if we didn't have a fire we would be cold and unprotected. I had gotten it suitably ready when Jeff came flying out of the ever-darkening woods. He did not have any firewood. I was a little upset by this since it was already nearly completely dark. "Jeff, what the?" is all I was able to get out before Jeff was at me throwing one arm around me and one over my mouth. I was terrified at this point. What was this? Why was he doing this to me? but I could hear him mumbling, "Oh fuck, oh fuck, 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 fuck." Please pardon my language, but he was mumbling that over and over in my ear. I knew what that meant too. It was bad and about to get worse. I heard my husband's voice in my ear again, Helly, his nickname for me. "When I say run, I want you to run as fast as you can back to the car and get the hell out of here." Okay. I was terrified at this point. What the hell had he seen? And was it coming for him? I moved his hand off my mouth and stated, "I'm not just going to run off and leave you, Jeff, and you know that. I have seen my husband scared only once in the 15 years I've known him. It was right after his father had a heart attack, and they didn't think he was going to make it." Jeff and his brother Dean paced the floor back and forth. Once I went to stop Jeff, to try to comfort him, but when I caught his eye, my heart broke. I grabbed him and held on as tightly as I could until his silent sobbing finally subsided. The look I saw when I caught his eye this time was so much worse than the last one. He was terrified of losing his father, but this was like he had reached a new level of fear. Before I could ask him anything else, we heard this god-awful roar. I mean, this thing could have shaken houses. It was the most terrifying and unexplainable sound I have ever heard. Jeff grabbed me, kissed my forehead, and told me to run. I didn't obey. I probably should have, considering how things turned out, but it's done. Not 2 seconds later, this monstrosity of a creature comes barreling into our camp and within view. I am a little embarrassed to say that I screamed like a little girl. I think most people would have. This thing is so hard to describe, but I am going to try my best. This thing was at least 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Either way, he was big. What really threw me off, though, wasn't how high he stood over me. It was how skinny he was. I can't describe to you how skinny he was. It was like he had never eaten in his life. Like skin simply draped over bones. His bones rippled through his gangly leathered skin. It looked like giant worms wriggling as he moved. His arms were almost as long as he was tall. They could stretch much farther than a typical man could, and he sort of looked like he just rose from the hell of the earth. He had a large head that looked like that of a deer, only a psychotic evil deer from Satan. His nose elongated and dripped with white, foamy drool. Just like a deer, he had long, knotty horns that branched from the tip of his skull. That leathery-looking skin was grayed and patchy with what appeared to have been hair at one time, with his hands and feet sprouting out what looked like weeds, like a big pile of hay had been stuffed up his sleeves. If he had had any, I might have been more relieved. The creature stood, watching for a moment, taking us in as we did him. I was terrified. I had never seen anything like that before. The scariest thing I have ever encountered in the woods was a wolf, but luckily it was alone and didn't appear to be hungry, so he just turned and jaunted off. This thing was quite the opposite. He looked hungry and determined. I started to scream uncontrollably. Apparently it didn't like that. He let out a roar at us, blowing that foul-smelling drool all over us. That sounded like everything you can think of dying and screaming in their death all at once. He then extended one of his giant arms and smacked me with it and grabbing Jeff before I could even get back up. I heard a rumbling sound as he pulled my husband closer to him. I realized with horror that rumbling was of hunger. Jeff was gone in an instant. The creature snapped his head off like a doll and swallowed in one quick gulp. He began just biting into Jeff's body like he was some kind of sandwich or something. The crunching was the worst. Trust me, it is a horrid sound no one ever needs to hear. I threw up, screamed, and then remembered that Jeff had told me to run. I was too late, though, because just as I was pulling myself, painfully I might add, out of the brush pile I had landed in, the monster was done with Jeff. Just like that, the man I knew for 15 years, the man I called my husband for 14 years, was just gone. But then he came back. The monster taunted me by becoming reflective as he moved. A facade of Jeff took his place. I could see my husband, like he had become him, but I could see through it too to the monster behind the disguise as well. Perhaps it was because I saw the monster before he changed, I don't know. Whatever the case may be, that thing can take the form of people it has killed and eaten, or at least that's my best guess. I finally freed myself from the brush and took off, full speed ahead toward the direction of the car. My husband's melodic voice filling my mind, my ears, my very core, beckoning me back. He was so convincing that I almost turned back. I fell into a huge hole. I think it was a trap. I just don't know if it was a trap from people for that monster, or a trap built by the monster to catch people. Either way, I fell at least 20 feet and my leg is broken in 3 places. I can't even move it. I'm going nowhere. I'm sitting here writing this now because I can still hear my husband's voice calling for me, and sometimes the monster's roar. He is looking for me, but he thankfully went the wrong way. I know what's going to happen though. He'll be back shortly and he will kill me, and then he will steal my face. So, please, if you ever find this, anyone, get out of these woods now. And don't come looking for me. I am dead. We both are, and some horrible monster is wearing our faces so he can eat you too. Mom, I love you so much. Don't come looking for me. Goodbye. Helena White. Me again. I can tell you this. I'm not going back out into those woods. Quick update. Apparently you should not Google the name of the woman above, Helena White, as she appears to be a porn star. When I Google my name, I get sent to a boob page. It kinda sucks. Anyway, for those of you wondering, let me try to explain it a little better. I live about a mile from where they have been logging. They are building a new road, one that is supposed to make it easier on us all to get around. Basically, they are bypassing our town. But the important part is that before they started the logging, I spent a lot of time back into those woods. I like the solitude and atmosphere, at least I did. I don't know how I got lucky enough to find that phone, but it was in a huge pile of dirt, barely sticking out of the side. They are ripping the place apart back there. I suppose it does have to be level for a roof though, right? I brought the phone home. Of course it was dead. I was able to charge it with an older universal charger my dad has. It was a fairly nice phone, and I thought I might be able to clean it up and give it to my little brother if I could get it working. I did. I went through it and I came across this message in a notepad app. I have absolutely no idea who this woman is, nor did I know that there is a porn star with the same name. LOL, sorry about that. As for the monster she keeps talking about, I don't have a single clue. I have never seen or heard about anything like that around here. Our campfire stories and old legends are pretty much the Goat Man and Bigfoot, so your guess is as good as mine. I thought of a Wendigo and a Skinwalker, but there have never been any stories of anything like that around here that I know of.